You say tomato, I say tomato. No, let's face it, I'm Southern. I'm never gonna say that. I say tomato or mater. Doesn't matter what you call it, this is America's second favorite vegetable. Actually, it's a fruit, technically a berry, but Americans eat more of these than anything besides king potato. That hasn't always been the case. Used to be, a lot of people thought this little beauty was deadly poison. Come on, let me take you where the food comes from. Thousands of years ago in Central America and South America, there was a bush that grew in the wild. It made a little tart, tangy berry. In Mexico, the Aztecs loved it. In Peru, the Incans loved it. And in fact, when they started farming, they started cultivating this little bush. Over time, with natural selection and crossbreeding, it began to turn into a lumpy, bumpy kind of thing that we might look at today and call an heirloom tomato. That's where our modern tomato got its start. The Spanish explorers took that fruit back to Europe, where for the next couple of hundred years it was mainly used as an ornamental plant because people thought it was poisonous. Now, tomatoes are part of the nightshade family, the deadly nightshade family, which includes things like belladonna. And people were dying from eating tomatoes, but that's not why. By medieval times, really only rich people could afford tomatoes. Rich people were also the only ones who could afford dishes. At the time, dishes were made of pewter. Pewter was made of silver and lead. The acid in the tomato would leach the lead from the pewter, and so the rich folks were dropping dead from lead poisoning. So a couple hundred years more go by, and one day, according to legend, a very brave man walked into a small village in Italy. He had a basket of tomatoes. He walked into the town square. He sat there and ate them all as a horrified audience looked on. But he didn't die. So then everybody all of a sudden said, hey, we love tomatoes. They began to spread around the world. They had always been eaten in some cultures and by some people. Not everybody believed the world was flat then either. But it took a while, and it took some convincing. And in fact, in the United States, tomatoes did not become universally popular until after the Civil War. Because in the 1820s, something popped up called the tomato hookworm. It's an ugly little critter. He's about 4 inches long with a big hook on the end. People believed that that worm was so poisonous, if it touched you, you would die. In fact, it was so poisonous, if you ate something it touched, you would die. But after the Civil War, the hookworm pretty much disappeared, and all of a sudden the game was on. And over the last 150 years, tomatoes have become the second most popular vegetable in the world. Tony, just about anybody in America is going to recognize the name on these trailers, the name on your shirt. But with a name like DiMare, thinking the family roots are probably not in Alabama.
Our family originated in Boston. My grandfather, Anthony, and his two brothers, Joseph and Dominic, started the DiMare Company. They were pushcart peddlers in the streets of Boston. Joseph came to Florida, to Fort Pierce, the east coast of Florida, in the late 40s and started farming for the company.
So I think a lot of people, modern agriculture is kind of hard to relate to because of the scope and the scale and the vastness of it all. But tomatoes might be the one thing that almost everybody at home can relate to. Everybody's tried to grow that pot out on the patio or plant a few in the backyard or start a little garden or a little tomato patch. But it's not as easy as it looks, is it?
Commercially, it can be very, very challenging depending on the local environment, soil types, the time of the year because of weather makes for challenging production. Although we don't plant from seed, we plant from transplant. It's generally about a 6-week-old plant, about 6-7 inches tall, and the plant is, on its way.
I think a lot of people wonder sometimes, do they wash this stuff? Yeah, twice. So literally within minutes of being harvested, they're already in the dunk tank and moving through the process.
Exactly. As you can see, we have some gondolas that we pick in here in Homestead. They're large trailers. Each one has about 30,000 pounds of product in it. We flume the product out into a heated dump tank that's chlorinated to kill any microbes and bacteria that may be in the fruit or on the fruit.
So Tony, the tomatoes have had that first nice bath, and then whatever kind they are, whatever size they are, the whole process starts here.
That's correct. They'll go through a series of eliminator, sizer belts that pull out small fruit that is not packable. We have a marketing order that we have to adhere to that's governed by USDA. So those will be discarded on the front of the line, and then the sorting starts with segregating any vine ripe color that comes into the field. And on average, over a course of a season, we harvest about 10 to 15% of our total production as of vine ripe. The rest is mature green. Graders will sort product that is not marketable, and that could be tomato that is too misshapen, or maybe has a cut in it or insect damage. Those tomatoes are discarded on the front end, as well as the color being sorted, and the color then goes down to the end of the operation where it is regraded and sorted into light color and heavier color.
So we certainly hear a lot of talk about how difficult it is to find good agricultural labor on the farm. But these jobs are equally important, and I would guess probably equally difficult to fill.
They are, because the nature of our industry is a seasonal industry. We don't necessarily operate 12 months a year in any one location. We're reliant on the local people. In a lot of cases, a lot of returnee employees have been with the company for, in some cases, decades.
Farmers are ingenious wherever they're from. They found a way to up their game, oftentimes with American assistance, and they were able to grow a comparable tomato to what's grown here in Florida, but they had a very key advantage in labor cost, whereas they could pay maybe $8 a day versus $15 an hour.
It's really led to the demise, of the a lot of the Florida growers. In addition to that, obviously, the so-called dumping, selling product cheaper into the United States.
So Tony, you're talking about the demise of the Florida industry, but everywhere we're going, we see thousands of acres of Florida tomatoes.
With this transformation over time, we've gone from about 60,000 planted acres of tomatoes in Florida, going back to the early 80s, to less than 30,000 acres today, probably close to 25,000 acres. And during that same period of time, we had about 300 tomato producers in the state of Florida. We're down to about 30 today.
So even with limited protections in place, Florida tomato growers and U.S. growers in many commodities are losing a little more ground every year. And for Florida tomato, that's been cumulative for 30 years.
It has, and that's why you've seen this tremendous reduction in planted acreage and a mass exodus of growers going out of our industry. And unfortunately, that trend is continuing because I don't see from our government, who is supposed to be protecting, our industry. Remember, we're not multinational corporations, but we are multi-generational. 96% of the farms still today are family owned, and we'd like to keep that tradition going. But with what I see happening today and the lack of protections in our marketplace and market share in the industry, that trend is continuing to go downhill.
So at this point in the process, all the tomatoes have been sorted, they've all been graded, and they're coming down this line where they're gonna wind up in a 25-pound box, which is lovely, but almost nobody ever sees this box.
After we package our product, some cases they go direct to terminal market wholesale operation, but the majority of our product ends up going to a tomato repacker to fit the specifications of that given repacker's customer base, retail or food service customer.
So that could be a different grocery store or a different market that just, they want their label on it, they want their name on it. As much as I love fried green tomatoes, I mean, this entire room is full of green tomatoes. I don't think I could even go through that many. These are gonna be at the store very soon. What's gonna happen that's gonna change these tomatoes from this lovely bright green shade to that lovely bright red shade?
Through our degreening and ripening process, introduce a natural product, ethylene, which tomatoes, bananas, and avocados naturally contain.
That's a gas that those products, as they ripen, just naturally give off.
Yeah, it comes in liquid product. We convert it into a gas through a generator. All we're doing is accelerating, speeding up the ripening process.
So anybody who thinks you're gassing tomatoes or introducing some kind of artificial chemical in the process, that's just simply not correct.
That's not correct, and we again in the industry like to refer to it as degreening or ripening and not gassing.
So how long will they be in this room before they start that process and turning red?
So 2 days, you can already see an indication of that tomato
They're lighting
starting
it up here. You can see a
ripen.
little pink blushing through right there. And then the logistics process starts, where they're going. And even before that, the research component, where there are scientists working with growers to try to figure out the next best generation of tomatoes. Save me some green ones, okay? I saw a study the other day, research USDA shows that 96% of all American farms are still family owned. It doesn't matter how big those farms are, there's still a family behind it, there's still a name behind it. And those farming operations really become an integral part of the communities where they are and the communities that they serve, and your story is certainly no different.
No, and I have myself and my brothers and cousins are third generation in the family business. Our fathers are still actively involved, the second generation, and soon to be my son and my brother's son. So we're excited about that, to carry the tradition, of the DiMare family going forward. Makes Dad and I know my brother proud.
That's got to feel pretty amazing. We're sitting here in a restaurant in Homestead, Florida, but this is your tomato. That's got to be a cool feeling.
Very satisfying to realize the fruits of your hard work and labor. The company's dedication, the employees that we employ, all played a part in providing nutritious food product to the local community.
It's not just nutritious, it's also really, really good.
We're here in our molecular lab. We're looking for specific genes that we know are present, and we have molecular markers that are nearby those genes. So without making any genetic modification, we're able to go in and determine which plants carry that gene and which plants do not. This is really helpful to me if I can only plant individuals to the field that carry the gene that I want, and the ones that don't carry that gene, I can leave them behind. Because if the grower can't pick the tomatoes, then the consumer's not going to eat them. As we're trying to develop new varieties to get to the consumers, we have to keep all these things in mind. I have to build that tomato that has the characteristics that the consumer wants, and it's got to have those characteristics that the grower needs. So out in our greenhouse, we have thousands and thousands of plants growing right now. And we go in and we collect a little sample of leaf tissue from each of those plants, and then we set up molecular marker assays, and we can test for those gene combinations in each one of those plants individually.
Sam, I know a lot of this, as a country kid from Mississippi, looks real familiar to you, what we're looking at right here in front of us. But a lot of it, man, if 10-year-old Sam had seen this, what would he have thought?
A lot of plants here. So everything here is about 100,000, 200,000 plants in this greenhouse. And every time you see a different stake, that's a different line. There's something unique about that.
In my job, I get to go out and talk to different people about different things every day. And when I talk to people like you, it's kind of like your whole area of focus, and it's all tomatoes. When did the tomato bug bite you?
Growing up on that farm, I saw the good years, I saw the bad years for my dad. I saw farmers struggling. I saw how important it was for them to get those varieties that make a difference. The better variety, the better yielding variety, that's the one he wanted to grow. And I thought, if I'm going to stay in agriculture, I want to do something that's going to impact the growers. And the variety aspect of it always fascinated me.
Tens of thousands of seedling varieties that we saw in the greenhouse. The winners out of that greenhouse wind up here in the test fields. What happens here, Sam?
You could say this is the race, right? And so those are the ones who are now eligible to compete in this race. And I'm trying to find the winners out here now. I want the new varieties. So whether this is part of a genetic study and we're trying to understand where are the genes that control this characteristic or that one, or as part of a yield trial and we're trying to look at, all right, these are our best hybrids from last year, which ones are top? Or it's just a matter of going through and trying to develop the next new variety, the next new parent line, and looking at all those different characteristics we were talking about before. Every one of these plants out here, I mean, we're trying to grow these the same way a commercial farmer would, right? So we're using plastic covered beds, we fumigated the beds, we have fertilizer, we have irrigation, and we're going to come back in and we're going to stake these up, and then I have to go through and evaluate, usually plant by plant later on. And I'm looking for, how does the vine look? How do the fruit look? How many fruit are on there? What do they taste like? And the list goes on and on.
How many different varieties are in trial in the field at any one time?
So we started planting last week and we got about a third of the way done. And a few weeks from now, we'll be most of the way done planting. And we'll have roughly 1,000 different breeding lines, and any one of those might become a new parent.
We're in a Florida field, and this is a product of the University of Florida. These tomatoes may well work elsewhere commercially, and that was the case with the Tasty Lee tomato that Dr. J. Scott developed, and Florida growers had first crack at it. and then that seed was licensed to other growers in other places. That generates royalties for the University of Florida that help continue this research. Now, the Tasty Lee has really been probably the rock star to come out of this program in terms of name brand recognition.
Yeah, I tip my hat to Jay Scott because his development there of that variety was incredible. To get a variety that tastes good and performs well, that's a really challenging combination of traits there. But so I think it just raised the bar for us, and that's our new target.
Extraordinary people are honored in extraordinary ways. You might get a statue, you might get a monument, you might get a plaque. They might make a movie about your life, but if you're really special, you become a superhero in your own comic book. Dr. Scott, I don't think I've ever met anyone before who was actually the star of their own comic book.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting, and I tried to rub it in with as many of my colleagues as I could, but they didn't seem to be quite as impressed as most of us with sense would be over that thing. But it was a lot of fun. It was pretty cool.
We see this circle of research that comes around, always trying to raise the bar, raise the bar, raise the bar. Sometimes compromises are made for different reasons. You've got to have something that lasts longer in order to make it commercially viable. You've got to have something that might not taste as good, but will stand up to shipping better. And these are little trade-offs that we make as we go along. With the Tasty Lee, your goal was just to make a tomato that tasted really good, stayed nice and firm, had good color, smelled wonderful, but again, the most important thing was it tasted great.
I got the job offer at the University of Florida, and everybody that I told about that job offer said the same thing. I'm not making this up. They said, well, put some flavor in the tomatoes, that's what they need. So there's been this dissatisfaction with tomatoes.
I believe it was a family member who put you on the road to what would ultimately become the Tasty Lee, and in fact, that tomato is named after that family member.
Well, I named the tomato after my mother-in-law, and you hear a lot of stories that maybe, let's say, aren't so complimentary about people's mother-in-laws, but my mother-in-law and I always got along quite well, and she was a real tomato lover. But it was in honor of her. I guess I'd have to say I might have done a little marketing ploy there with that one, because there's a lot of mother-in-laws out there, and they take too much gruff sometimes, and I figured they'd be buying the tomatoes even if nobody else was.
So will it be a rock star tomato like the Tasty Lee that saves the world, or at least the American grower? Will it be some other innovation, some other breakthrough, some other technology? Nobody knows. That's part of the beauty of things. But we know they'll keep looking for it out here where the food comes from.